Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We are just getting started. We are connected live on Facebook as well. And of course, on this evening, as you all know, we are here to have a conversation, to have a discussion with Dr. Larry Miles. Dr. Larry Miles was raised in Paterson, New Jersey. He completed his Bachelor's of Arts degree in English, Psychology, and History at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. He also completed his graduate coursework at UL Lafayette in Rhetoric and Americana Studies. In 2009, Dr. Miles completed his Master of Arts in Africana Studies at Clark Atlanta University, and in 2018, he completed a dual PhD in English and Africana Studies at CAU. He has served as the Southern Region President for the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations and as a board member for the National Council for Black Studies as a Cato Fellow. He is also a veteran of the U.S. Army. His research spans the African diaspora, and he is currently doing research on pre-Columbian African people in the Americas with a focus on the Algonquin-speaking nations, Moorish travelers, merchants, and early American culture and languages. Currently, Dr. Miles is a lecturer, AP World History teacher with Atlanta Public Schools, and an adjunct professor of English and the Humanities at Clark Atlanta University. Welcome, Dr. Miles. How are you? We are so happy to have you here.
Work, Wayne. I'm wonderful. And yourself?
I am doing fine. So just tell us a little bit about the premise of this book. Let's just get started there.
Well, I have 2 degrees in Africana Studies, a master's degree and also a PhD in Africana Studies. And what I began to understand about US history or world history as it is Western history doesn't begin until these famous lines, when the Moors were forced out of Europe, right? All the Western history basically begins at that singularity, it seems. 1492, right? January 1st, 1492, we get the Moors are forced out of Spain and Portugal, and of course we're going to see the developments after, and I'll get to that in a second. But at that point, we get the narrative of this Cristobal Colon or Christopher Columbus individual traversing the Atlantic Ocean, formerly the Ethiopian Sea, to come and, of course, discover America. Well, that's when everything begins. But what had happened was they never told us what it meant that the Moors are forced out of Spain. Who are these Moors? What does it mean? Where did the Moors go when they're forced out? What happened to this population of people? Wait, go back. Why were they in Europe? What precipitated these people to come into Europe? And then the most important question, who are Moors? What does the word Moor mean? Like, what is the significance behind understanding this entire cultural narrative? So in reading and studying and going through these degrees, I began to wonder, why does Western history begin there, but yet we don't have a narrative of what happened to these people? And then who are these people? So I came across some texts. And of course, the first text that sort of sparked my imagination was Dr. Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus. Yes, let's start there. Next, we go into Dr. Ivan Van Sertima's edited text, The Golden Age of the Moors. So now we're going into like a narrative history of who these people are, who was coming to the Americas, or where, this Moorish sort of construct was situated and everything else. And from him, of course, we're going to read Stanley Lane Poole's work, the Moors after Spain and so forth. And I began to realize that there is a narrative of Moors, AKA Black people, that we are just not taught, that is completely lost in our academic development as we go through our K through 12 primary education and we get to the collegiate level. It's just not taught. And I wondered why. And then we start seeing narratives of Moorish history and culture in the Americas via the Moorish Science Temple of America, thanks to Noble Drew Ali. And then even that doesn't become part of what I experienced in my master's and PhD program, in understanding the impact of Moors even in the 20th century America, right? And how that has influenced even what has come down to us understanding African-American culture. Like the Moorish Science Temple of America had a profound effect on what we know of as African-American culture, especially being sort of the foundation that's going to sort of inspire the UNIA under Marcus Mosiah Garvey. It's going to inspire the development of the Nation of Islam. Like all these things are because of this Moorish history that is completely made like almost extinct in our cultural narrative. And one of the things I began to understand is because of the establishment of particular nation states and their development throughout time, when they began to tell the narrative of their coming into being. So every nation state has a coming into being story. This is very important. And how they tell their story, meaning their cultural narrative, what they say about themselves and what makes them become, meaning what is the narrative of the United States of America? How does it come into existence, right? Well, in establishing that national story, there's going to be people that we're going to make heroes of, and there are going to be whole populations of people who are going to become eliminated from the narrative. Not that they're eliminated physically, meaning they don't die off, but what happens is that there becomes a pencil genocide of their entire narrative where they become non-existent in our historical narrative. And the issue at its root is that it is the narrative that shapes human behavior. What you know of yourself determines how you behave as a human being. It's going to determine how you interact with other people who are unlike you, right? Because of how you see yourself historically in the present, right? What I think of myself is going to determine how I perceive other people. And by eliminating such a vast amount of our cultural narrative, our historical narrative, we have been regulated to a singularity. And that singularity means to be Black in America means you were only the progeny of slavery. And that is the one-to-one correlation that I think I'm doing my best to articulate in Afro and Indigenous Intersectionality in America as a Nomen. Intersectionally Black.
Yes, and I know we're gonna, show this to people later, but just if you haven't seen it, his book cover and this idea of intersectionally Black. And we're gonna get more into that later because I know as we were prepping for this, I definitely want us to get more into the African-American relationship with enslavement. But before we get into that, tell us the why of your book. You gave us the premise. What is your why?
All right, so just Sunday, we had Mother's Day, right? So happy belated Mother's Day to all those mothers. And I was talking to a really good friend of mine, and I realized that in my growth since I was a young person, I left my parents' home when I was 14 and went to live with my auntie and my mother's sister and my uncle, Papa and Miss Capers. And at 17, I'm leaving Jersey altogether and running off to college, right? And I realized I had never spent the Mother's Day with my mother. Like I never been able to take her out to dinner. Like pamper her as a mother. Let's say, Mommy, I love you on this day. Like I never experienced that. But I realized like she was the impetus of the book altogether. So there was a time when she had come to visit me and my sister here in Georgia, and she was staying with me. And basically my library was, it took up so much of my home that, when, she's in my office sleeping and books are everywhere, right? So we would get into these conversations, and my mother, Bishop Gloria L. Corey Smiles, right? We get into these wonderful conversations about religion and humanity and who we are as people. And I'm telling my mommy about everything I know. And I'm like, mommy, and she said, well, baby, you got to write a book. I'm like, mommy, I don't have to write a book. It's already written. Like, this stuff is already written. Like the people just read the books that I read. And she said, no, baby, you got to put it all in one book. Like, mommy, how? But I understood what she was saying to me. I understood that she was saying codify some of these thoughts into a space that, other people can share in your ideas. Like, you're giving me all this information, Shug, but you got to put it into a space where people can take pieces of it and then be able to break it down, right? You're giving me everything at one time versus allowing it to be broken down in segments so that we can like take pieces of it and take it in together. So that's the very impetus of the book. So I realized at that point in time, I was doing my doctoral degree at Clark Atlanta University. So obviously, thanks to the Humanities Department, Africana Studies Department, that English department over there, like, they nurtured me well. So I'm doing my dissertation, and yeah, they helped me learn to take every essay I was writing for every class I was taking to help build it toward my dissertation. And then my brother Josiah, he gave me a book that teaches us how to take our dissertations and turn them into a text. So I basically listened to my mama, and I basically listened and took in everything that I was learning at the institutions that I was either teaching at and studying at, and of course my family that said, yo man, like, let's go do this, let's go do this. So that is the reason why all of that research I was doing turned into a book. And I'm happy now. Like, not that I wasn't always happy in the research of it, because I love studying. Oh my goodness. The best job I ever had in my life was working at a bookstore. I got to sit there all day and just read, what better job to have? Anyway, that was the impetus of this text.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's always a beautiful story. And as I told you, when I actually held the hard copy of your book in my hands to, read, to prepare for this conversation, it literally brought tears to my eyes. And I was like, Mama, we made it, because, we are, somewhat of the same cohort. We matriculated together. So to see you go through this process and publish, I just can't say how much I'm proud of you. And I'm sure Mom's is just like, I told you do it. So now she's probably telling you what you write next.
Yeah, exactly.
What
Yes,
you write next.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into the actual text itself. Can you go through each chapter for us and explain to us what did you do in each chapter? What was the purpose of the chapter? We know we have some attendees tonight who did not get to read the text yet. So if you could give us an overview.
Yes. So first and foremost, I'm a poet, and I like to construct language a certain way. So every chapter I start off with a poem, and I really enjoy that. And I'm really I'm not necessarily just talking to people who like reading poetry, but I'm hoping that the poem gives them an idea of what they're going to sort of become immersed in as a conversation, right?
You actually went into one of my future questions, which is, why did you begin each chapter that way? So you don't mind just answering that now?
Oh, of course not. So yeah, that's what I was just saying. So let me do this. Let me read the first poem, right? Like in chapter 1, since many people don't have the book, right? So the first poem that introduces chapter 1, titled In Search of Identity, Who Named Him? My goodness, they're just so precious. What's his name? All they say we don't know. So they just call him nigger, spook, Negro, coon, colored, darky, black boy, boom. And I tell you for sure, he's just so precious. But what did he do? Nothing really, except run, jump, fly, swoon, sing, cry, or dance a June. Where'd he come from? Can anyone tell? Not really, but some say Cain, Satan, Ham, hell, only the Lord knows and God won't tell. So what do you reckon we do with him? Nothing really. He's just a nigger, boy, criminal, coon, blackie, African, or dead soon. So that's my poem. And then I open it with County Cullen when he says, "Yet do I marvel at this curious thing to make a poet black and bid him sing." Right? Like, so we open chapter 1 that says, now this thing has been thrusted upon you, right? Identity has been thrusted upon a people when it wasn't who they called themselves. So chapter 1 takes us through our interaction with the early colonial America, and most importantly, how the colonial societies began to develop themselves based on their concepts of this notion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I entrench it in the Declaration of Independence and how you have a people who are understanding what is the nature of human beings. And this is the part that and I know I didn't put this in the text, and I know that like when I'm trying to shorten everything that I want to talk about, I try to like say, oh, I don't need to talk about this and this and this and this. Let me just focus on this. But the very people who developed these, 13 colonies that eventually rebel against their king at that time in 1776 that inspires this Declaration of Independence, these individuals are learning the idea of confederation from the people that they were living amongst. So the whole Constitution in the United States literally is going to be almost not necessarily copied, but it's going to be copied from Guyana-Egata or Guyana-Stagawa that was a part of the Iroquois Confederation, right? And then forgive me, the train is going by, right? So understanding that the early colonists were literally copying the constructs and identities of these confederations of North America, we had to understand what were these people teaching these early colonists that allowed them the ability to rebel against their king and then help them solidify themselves. That's going to eventually become what we call the United States of America. So what I'm attempting to do in chapter 1 is juxtapose the fact that these individuals are arguing for this freedom that they only know because of the indigenous populations in America, right? Who eventually I explain are people who are going to be classified as Negro, Black, and colored. They're learning this concept of freedom from these people, and yet at the same time, in a contradictory and sort of sordid way, they are oppressing those very same people that they're learning the ideas of freedom from. Anyway, let me go to chapter 2. So chapter 2 it breaks down the 4-part structure of how we tell our narrative of America, how we tell our cultural narratives, and how the West was constructed. And it begins with, of course, 1492, like I said earlier, when the Moors are forced out of Spain. And then we have a 4-part structure of how we tell our story and how the African American comes into existence. So the first stage, of course, 1492. Second stage is the mass murder of all the indigenous people. Stage 3 is the removal of after the mass slaughter of the indigenous people, then we have the importation of the African from continental Africa. And then of course, the movement of these enslaved Africans, these war captives, into this nation state we call the United States, renaming them from Negro captives to African American. So the 4-part narrative maps this out, and I use as the exemplar of the American narrative, the U.S. narrative in particular, the Howard Zinn's A People's History of America. And I like the text, and the text is important to telling the story. In fact, when it was first published, it was controversial because many people believe that Howard Zinn was attempting to put so much blame or sort of attack the construct of the United States as not this thing that was ordained by God, as most history textbooks have been teaching. Like the way we're taught the history of the United States of America is that this was ordained by God. This march west, like, was God given right to come out and do what they did. So for Howard Zinn to write his text and suggest like, wait, time out, we got to look at these people as being contradictory to a God-given idea, and talk about also the brutality of this march west. So I use his text because it functions in different ways, but then I also juxtapose how we have taken on, meaning people who identify as African-American have taken on that same sort of four-part structured narrative also, right? We've adopted somebody else's, let me take a step back, and it's going to say the same thing, right? The way we study history, the way we teach history in the American Academy, it's almost like when we teach a point in history, the rest of the world stops. Nothing else is going on. Is this at this moment in time, this happened, and nothing anywhere in the world is going on. So we jump from time period to time period and say this happened, but what happened in between all that time? Like, human beings stopped moving. So we only taught specific dates, and we're taught like individual moments, and with all that human behavior going on in the meanwhile. As a brief example, 1492, after the Moors are forced out of Spain, where did they go? You got 100-year period, more than 100-year period, wherein these people who are in exile from the European continent, or from this part of the European continent called the Iberian Peninsula, where are they going, right? Where are they ending up? What is their cultural narrative? Well, if we go deeper into the narrative, we find during that 100-year period, more than 100-year period, that they're going into France, they're going into England, they're going into Germany, they're going into the Netherlands, they're coming to America. They're literally coming to America by the waves. But by the time they get here to the Americas, they're no longer called Moors, right? When they go into France, they're not called Moors anymore. They're going to be called Protestants, right? Or Huguenots, right? Like, we're going to be given different names of this population of people who once inhabited particular areas. When they end up in England, they're going to be called Blackamoor, right? Well, when it's going to have a derogatory term at times, I talk about in chapter 3, but that space and time becomes not a part of the way we teach human history. But that space and time is so important to understand who's peopling America. Because what we're going to find amongst almost all of the indigenous populations that dot the Eastern Seaboard, you're going to find these Moorish people having a wonderful impact on the cultures of North America proper. Not just that, but the Caribbean, and in South America, and in Mexico. Right, so we're going to see these people there. So chapter 2 lets us walk through that four-part narrative, right, and attempt to fill in some of the missing spaces of our historical narrative. Chapter 3, I actually mentioned it in the book. That's my favorite chapter. I like that one because I get to be English major along with being historian, African-American studies major, because I get to talk about Othello, because I'm a big fan of Shakespeare. Not fan, like, fanboy, but I love like English lit. I've been teaching English lit for years.
Yes.
So
I do want to note that I also love how you titled chapter 3, So Much More, spelled M-O-O-R.
Yes.
And more M-O-R-E than a slave. So just talk about your play on language with this chapter.
Yes. Yes. In fact, Dr. Timothy Moore, M-O-O-R-E, basically, like, elaborated on that, in his remark on the back cover. So I get to start off with a juxtaposition between the narrative of Othello as found, as written by Shakespeare, and that character Othello and how he functions inside an English environment, or what we've come to consider a white society. And it wasn't really a white society, but that's not where we're going to go with there right now. And what I did was use Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Sidney Poitier as a earmark to say, this is, that movie, in my perception, is a, what if Othello and Desdemona met the parents prior to marrying? Right? And then we get that Guess Who's Coming to Dinner sort of movie that says, like, what would the relationship have looked like if these two people had met prior to marrying, like Othello and Desdemona does in secret? So in the movie, we see Sidney Poitier, his character, Prentice, like he's a doctor, like he's an accomplished man. And he's compared with the, this European woman who's just, she's still in college. She hasn't accomplished anything, right? Ironically, and not going, I will not talk about this anywhere other than this. In my dissertation, I actually used Tiger Woods as another example. In my first, presentation of my dissertation, but it was, kicked back by one of my committee members that said, wait, you don't say that right now. But I used Tiger Woods and him marrying a nanny. Here was a billionaire and his counterpart that people literally thought that Tiger Woods wasn't good enough for her, and he's a billionaire. So here you have these very, very, very wealthy or well-accomplished Black men who their white women counterparts they're not on equal par, but yet it is the Blackness of these characters that sort of make them less qualified to even have whiteness as their partner. You see, so then I get to talk about how Blackness now functions because of the society in American society where Blackness now is relegated to a second class, and not just a second, but even almost a third class, right? So that even a doctor, a billionaire Black man is not worthy of even a nanny, if that makes sense. So I'm just playing on that idea. And of course, in chapter 3, I go into the Moors in America, and of course, the Moorish Science Temple of America. And I truly am appreciative of having come across all this beautiful information via the Moorish Science Temple and studying Noble Ali, getting a copy of the Circle 7 Quran, and learning and studying and seeing like what Noble Ali compiled in that Circle 7, and even the development of the Moorish Science Temple of America, and how it has such a wonderful influence on Black life in America, to the point where we don't even see how the Moorish Science Temple has become part and parcel to our African Methodist Episcopal tradition after 1913, right? Even the celebration of Blackness in our African-American churches, our Black Pentecostal churches, and our Black Baptist churches, and how much of even Islamic culture spreads into the rest of our African-American spaces, right? So I get to do wonderful things with that, saying like, yo, we're more than what the narrative is suggesting, that we only came here in the hull of a slave ship. And I used Noble Ali and the Moorish Science Temple to help fulfill much of chapter 3. Chapter 4 is, that's the charge, right? And the charge in chapter 4 is to remember, right? Remembering ourselves. And I spell remember R-E-MEMBER. The R-E meaning to do again. And of course, the piece back together. And I mentioned the most beautiful narrative we've ever had in remembering is the Sar Aset drama, right? Or the Sarian drama, wherein after the dismantling of this body into all these different pieces, it's going to be a Sar who is going to, and the language tells us it's going to recollect the body of a Sar, right? So just go ahead and recollect this, go recollect the body of a Sar, so that we piece together our whole self and birth that new self that fulfills the narrative of our liberation. Now, I mean, like, so I'm using our historical narratives, and the wonderful thing is I'm tying the Asarian drama back into the early American narrative because we have so much evidence that it was ancient Kemites who were coming to the Americas thousands of years before our Columbian era. We have so much information that proves this, from J. Edgar Rasboy to Ivan Van Sertima to this absolutely wonderful information that tells us who we are, how long we've been here, and we don't have to have this one-to-one correlation of African-American to slave. And I think once we break that one-to-one correlation, it does something different for who we are, because it gives us agency in who we are. We are not the product of somebody else's making. Meaning, we don't start our entire cultural narrative off with, when they brought us here, because if they brought you here, then they get to do what they will with you.
Wow, just so much to talk about with so little time, right?
Yes, great.
It just makes me think about how I often begin every class, no matter the course, even when I was teaching world history, European history, it didn't matter. Our history as Black people does not begin with enslavement. In fact, enslavement interrupted our history, right? And that's something that we need to remember. So let's get into it. Everyone, please use the Q&A for your comments as well. I noticed that the chat is disabled. You can see only what myself and Dr. Miles send. So please use the Q&A for comments as well. And of course, for any questions you may have. So I have the honor and privilege of knowing Dr. Miles personally for years. And when I was reading your book, I can literally hear your voice. And we are taught, what's the first thing we're taught? Don't write like you talk. And I said, well, he knows this. Why is he doing this? Why are these statements so long? What? And I was like, this is on purpose. So my question is, why did you use the linguistic methods you did, the semantics, the grammar of it all? What, first off, was that on purpose? And if so, tell me why.
So let me, the dissertation isn't that way. The dissertation is structured, right? But when it came down to the conversing in the text, like I literally say over and over again, like, this is a conversation. So if I'm talking with you, I'm even deciding to pose questions that I think you might thinking with me at the same time that we're learning this thing together. Did that make sense? Like, if we come across the same information at the same time, we might pose the same questions, right? So during the course of my dialogue, I'm imagining I'm talking with somebody. And sometimes when I'm talking with somebody, I don't put a comma there. Or I don't stop my breath, because one of the things I do want to do, I want to pull you along this journey. And it is sort of narrative. It's a conversation, right? It is structured to be an academic text, right? I do want it to function as an academic text where we can use this inside of schools, where it becomes a supplemental text. I didn't break it down where it can become a text for an actual class, but I did break it down to where you can use it as a supplementary. So wherein you're studying, say, early American society, you can refer back to the text because of the index and the footnotes. So I want to document where the information is coming from and why I'm telling the story this way, why I'm narrating it this way. But when it comes down to the pace of it, it's sort of like I want you to like get involved like a drum beat, a heartbeat. So when I'm talking, like I want it to be rhythmic, like and I know not everyone is not going to read at the same pace as I speak, but I think because it's such a short read, meaning, like, I do believe people will enjoy the book because they can get through the book within a couple of days, right? It's not going to be one of those laborious texts that's going to take so long for me to read.
No, you don't want to put it down.
It moves fast.
Yeah.
But it moves fast enough for the information to be dropped in like a conversation. Like, oh, these people with this, and these people with this, and these people with that. Why we call them this? You see? So it's on purpose that I'm moving us along in this sort of conversational and I literally am talking with people. Like I'm talking with the people who are reading the text. Like there are moments when I actually go on a rant. And I'm asking questions like, how is it that you can make me think this? And we're not proposing these, real questions to me, or not giving me the information in this way. Do you know what this is going to do to my mind as a young Black person growing up in this society, right? What are the consequences of me learning information this way? Shouldn't it be done this way, right? So I'm playing with our ability as writers to determine how we want our readers to move, because you have power when you write. You have the ability to determine the pace and using the words. If I want you to move faster, I'm going to use shorter words. If I want you to slow down and conceptualize an idea, like when I go through the different nation states that were here in North America, I want you to slow down and try to say their name, right? So I'm writing out their name. Right, when I post the Massachusetts delegates' argument to to their Congress in a plea for freedom, I want you to read their words in their words, and I want you to hear so I didn't rewrite it so it's proper English. I wanted you to read it like what Paul Laurence Dunbar did when he, what I mean? Like, so you're gonna have to read our language, you have to read our sounds. We can have people even read an accent into our writing, depending on how we spell a particular word. You see? So we have so much control when we write that I wanted to, play on that. I wanted to participate in our ability to move people along a certain way by the way I write a narrative.
Got you. Thank you. Now I have a question for you, and this is one that I actually just thought about as we were right, as you were talking about how you started each chapter, and when we talk about identity in terms of naming, and with you being a graduate, as of I, am as well, University of Louisiana Lafayette, but when you went, it was, USL, the people don't know about that.
Yes.
Ernest Gaines. When I was reading that first chapter, and it's reminiscent throughout the text, it made me think of his work, A Lesson Before Dying. When he was talking about this importance of naming in that text. And with what you're arguing, essentially, I thought about that when we think about our identity, we truly have not lived until we even know who we are. So in essence, there's a death that has happened before we even got to live. I wanted to get your thoughts on that, about this importance of naming and identity and how it really is a matter of life.
Wow, that's heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's heavy. So let me start by saying one of our brothers, one of the brothers we were together with at UL Lafayette, sent us an image of Ernest Gaines's forever stamps with the U.S. Postal Service. So he was our resident and writer in residence at UL Lafayette at the time when I was there. Let's stay there at UL. And let's say UL, when I first got there, was called the Bulldogs. That was their mascot. The UL Bulldogs, USL Bulldogs. Then it became the University of Louisiana at Lafayette Raging Cajuns. Yeah. But this is the important thing. I don't even think, well, I don't know. So I don't know the construct of why they changed it to the Cajuns, but I don't think they paid too much attention to understand, like, if we really studied the history of the Acadians and who was migrating from Canada to Louisiana, then we're gonna have to start having a different conversation about who's taking on that cultural history. But that's another story for another time.
We actually had a talk on that a few weeks ago with Dr. Lindsay, who did a documentary on New Iberia, Lafayette, St.
Yes.
with Cajuns versus Creoles. So
yes.
Yes.
So that's another story for another day. But I remember when we were founding our institution at UL Lafayette, I became a part of a group we call ourselves 1,000 Buffalo Scholars, right? And I have some absolutely brilliant brothers who will rock with me on this thing. And I remember going around campus and handing out flyers for some of the events that we were having on campus. And I remember there was a young lady standing on the steps of the, building where most of the athletes stay. And I was handing her a flyer and it said African American on it. And the young lady screamed at me. She yelled at me with such vitriol that it made me cringe. And her words were, "I hate this. I hate that we do this. Don't nobody else call themselves other than just being American. Like, why we gotta be African American? Why we gotta be, and I ain't no African." And she was literally serious, and it seemed like it was coming from a place of sincerity that, but it was like, I understood what she was, no, I'm lying. I did not understand what she was saying at the time. I just thought like, yo, she don't want to be Black, right? But I began to think later, how come I couldn't say to her, well, young lady, like everybody do this. I can go to different areas of the United States and find a Greek town. I can go to different areas and find a Chinatown. I can go to different areas and find other people celebrating their culture. In fact, they changed the name to the Raging Cajuns in order to celebrate a specific group of people in that area, right? We can go and find a Notre Dame Fighting Irish. We can find people celebrating their cultural history. But when it comes to Black people, there was this sort of disdain at times, and I'm not going to universalize Blackness in no way, shape, or form. That's why I, subtitled the book "Intersectionally Black," because we come in many different like structures, like personalities, constructs, cultures that make up this thing called Blackness. That's why it was very important in the Haitian Constitution in 1704 for them to say we're going to use this generic term Black, not like we understand that we can apply this to different groupings of people, this concept of Blackness, right? So I got it afterward, right, to try to do an analysis of why people run away from this concept of being African American, because that term does come with a whole heap of cultural history that people now have to internalize. And many people don't want to associate it with it because what they knew of Africa, right? What they think of Africa, what they were taught of Africa, so they reject it.
But also what they know of African people in America, right?
Exactly, because it starts at slavery, right? And I don't think, I'm proud to say like, yo, my people are people who fought. Now, I mean, they were captives in warfare. Like, in order for them to get here, they had to be captured in war. So this isn't like, yo, we were just standing on the shores of Africa saying, come and get these people. No, this was war that captured these people. And even after they came here, it was such a movement toward our liberation. We weren't waiting for nobody to free us. We freed ourselves. So that is an honorable part of our history that we can attach ourselves to. But I think there are many people who don't find the beauty in that. It is a form of weakness. It is a form that somebody else had the ability to, and the aspiration is to leave behind that sort of subjugation concept. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I can't be that. I need to be more than that. But if we understand it, like, what other people have survived what we survived? And then on top of that, it's a continued assault against us. And the worst part about this continued assault against this concept is that the people who are maintaining the assault understand that they don't survive without our continued subjugation. They can't have what they have without the constant subjugation of this population of people, right? And then on top of that, these people who you have subjugated are the very thing, the essence of which your culture comes from. There is no food without our either indigenous or African imports. Like, stop that. Like, we are the foundation of every part of American society, except, to a degree, the brutality of racism. You know what I mean? Like the subjugation of peoples based on color code caste systems and like putting people in places of subjugation. Like this is a rarity. So I understand why some people might feel they need to reject the term African American at times. But
And let's talk about that some more, because in your text you did go into the history, right? So some of us know, or look, we all should know, but at least I know some of us on this call knows that when white Americans identified and defined racial classifications, right? You had your Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Australioid, and then Negroid. Notice how it was intentional to not even put the Native American in there, because the intent was that, well, we about to get them out of here anyway, totally, total extermination. So when you say being able to identify with that dark history, could we also argue that there's a problem with wanting to identify with African American today, because that racial classification, how it's ranked, is still very much functional in today's society? We can see that. Okay. We can see that Black people continue to remain at the bottom of every ranking when it comes to our existence in this country. So can you speak more on an understanding of not wanting to associate with that, or are you saying no, that is a part of who we are, recognizing that as African Americans, being enslaved is a part of our history, but not all of it? So how would you push this argument in terms of how we identify today?
Yeah, so I think that there's a few things in that. Like, one is the development of the racial classifications, right? Let's go back to Johann Sebastian Blumenbach, Karl von Linnaeus, and then their codification of that whole thing by 1850 with that dude named Charles Darwin. Right? So once we get to him, we start seeing like, yo, but wait, they didn't do that to 1850. You know what I mean? Like, so we understand that there was a progression from 1685 or so to 1850. It took time for this thing to latch on, like the classification of human beings via this concept we call race. It took time for it to latch on, but by the time Charles Darwin got it, it moved the needle, right? And that needle helped them establish the next phase of that thing they call eugenics. And that phase of eugenics ran wreckshop across humanity. And once they began to establish that thing by 1903, I promise you, every institution in the United States began to structure itself on the concept of whiteness as the superior class everywhere. It took time to develop it. They had to weed out things. By 1924, they're going to have something called the Racial Integrity Act. And it's going to start in Virginia, but it's going to now start making sure we start classifying people according to these races. And when we do that, it makes the people who are now being classified aspire to something other than the lowest class. We saw that when, and the funny thing about the Spanish, when they're going to colonize the Americas, theirs isn't based on skin complexion alone, right? It isn't based on skin. They're going to set up their racial caste system based on their closeness to what they call peninsuleras, right? The peninsula. But what they do to the Americas is going to be a caste system, right? But when these people who are going to classify themselves as white after Johann Sebastian Blumenbach and moving on up to Charles Darwin and into the development of eugenics, when they begin to classify that thing as whiteness, I'm talking about they're going to invest millions of dollars into the development of institutions that's going to perpetuate that thing.
And let's not forget about 1790, the Naturalization Act.
Yeah.
Let's forget about the Chinese Exclusion Act.
So we see these moments, right? But like look at the development of institutions that's going to now perpetuate it in every facet of our lives, starting with the National Education Board, right? Or General Education Board, right? And from the General Education Board, we start seeing whole universities being developed in order to espouse this concept of racial superiority. And then every part of our society is going to do that. So I begin to understand, like, when everywhere you go, And as Dr. Francis Perce Wilson told us, if in every place you go in our society, you're going to get your dose of this concept of white supremacy, it's going to have an effect on our minds. Like, it's going to affect how we perceive ourselves. And I'm sure, even if you haven't been living in the structures that produce the abject poverty that might come from this color code caste system, you will still reject the possibilities of going down that far because you have a correlation to that Blackness. And you're going to do what you can to escape it, right? So you're going to reject those ideas wherein Black becomes inferior, and I will not become part of that, even if it means I have to reject the whole idea of being Black. So I can get it. I can understand it. What I'm attempting to do in the book is literally tell us our narrative of Blackness isn't just in subjugation, and there is no part of our reality that has to take its earmarks from a colonizer, right? Who we are as a people, we were before the colonizer. We are during the colonizer, and we're going to be after the colonizer based on all their statistics. We like babies, kids. We don't die, we multiply.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brother Miles. And would you believe we are at about 8 minutes left.
Oh,
So
wow.
I want us to get into our questions. And we have some comments. Sister Rakina Smith, thanks you for the Mother's Day wish. Brother B. Young, why are we using the indigenous label to describe a people who by all accounts were prosperous in the native land?
I apologize, one more time.
No problem. Why are we using the indigenous label to describe a people who by all accounts were prosperous in the native land?
And I'm not sure what that means, but I use the term, I create, like in the text, I use indigenous, IAFW, Indigenous Autochthonous First World People. So I label the indigenous people of all lands prior to the, obviously, Inca-Terra, what we eventually call the doctrine of discovery, issued by Pope Alexander VI, right? All the peoples of the lands that are eventually going to be colonized after the doctrine of discovery, or Inca-Terra, 1493, all of the peoples in these different territories that are going to be colonized, I label as indigenous. So whether that be the indigenous of America, the indigenous of Africa, Australia, anywhere in the South Pacific, like these people were colonized, they were indigenous to the land. When it comes down to the Americas, the people that I label as the indigenous people, and this is what I challenge my elders with in their text. For example, when we talk about the migration patterns of African people out of the continent of Africa, whether that be via Europe, going through Greenland, Iceland, and so forth, and coming down through Canada along the eastern seaboard as the Algonquin people, when we see this migration across the Atlantic that's going to go into South America, that's going to migrate itself up the Amazon into the into the Gulf of Mexico, and that's going to inhabit the islands in the Caribbean, and then eventually into Florida and up the coast of the eastern seaboard. I classify these people as early immigrants to the United States, but to the Americas, and they become indigenous because they're going to be the first inhabitants of the land. At least that's what many of our historical texts teach, right? So I label the indigenous populations based on that 1493 Inca-Terra, aka the doctrine of discovery. Anywhere European countries came out and discovered people, those were the indigenous people of those lands.
Got you. Thank you so much. Emily Williams commented, great. She wants to congratulate Miles. His book is the 5th one in her book series, the Black Atlantic Cultural Series, revisiting artistic, historical, literary, psychological, and sociological perspectives. Applause and respect. Glad she could attend. And Emily, we are thankful for your attendance as well.
Yes.
Sister Sandy Willis just wanted to stamp that Malcolm X stated, if you wanted to keep something from a Negro, put it in the book. She just wanted to stamp that for us. An anonymous attendee One, there is no reason to ever apologize for ignorance. This is what this platform is for, to ask questions, okay? The question is, what is a Kemite? And what about this migration?
Yes, okay, so the word Kem, or KMT, we use as the original sign. And my board is over there, and I would write it down in the glyph, but it's the Black lands of ancient Egypt, right? We call it Kemet, right? KMT, Kemet. So when I say Kemite, it's those people who came out of the Nile Valley. They're going to be two separate migrations of people that's going to come out of that Nile Valley. One group is going to be a Mandingo culture, or Mandi culture, that's going to westward, and I'm meaning it by the language, because we're able to trace these people via language and the written language. It's going to be westward across the continent of Africa, and then there's going to be the Tamil that's going to go into what we now call Eurasia, or what we call the Middle East today, right? Those people literally began migrating, those what we now call ancient Egyptians or ancient Kemites, for those of us who are part of that culture. Ancient Kemites literally were coming here to the Americas for hundreds of years. In fact, in Ivan Van Sertima's work, as I mentioned earlier, and I mentioned J.A. Jarasboy, right? Ramesses in the West, we see the same motifs that we see in ancient Egypt, aka Kemet. We see those same motifs in the priest kings or ruling monarchies here in the Americas, like the crook and flail. We see that in the Americas, along with seeing it in ancient Egypt. So when we say the migration, when I said the migration of these Kemites to the Americas, we're talking about these people dating back to 12, 13, 1400 BCE, coming to the Americas and leaving a major impact on the Americas. In fact, there was a scholar in the early 1900s, a gentleman named Frank Joseph. He put out a bunch of information showing how the Kemites, it was like regular, their lore, like this is where they come in order to come out and chill. I mean, this is their vacation spots. They literally went along and went up the Mississippi. But there's also these wonderful narratives that do a comparison between the Pharaoh Akhenaten and the Sachems of early America, and how it might be a one-to-one correlation between the narratives of what was going on with Akhenaten, and they're having possibly an effect. In the name of the one here in the Americas, they call him Daganawida, right? Mm-hmm. And he has almost the same story that resembles sort of the Mosaic, the Moses story of the Hebrew Bible about, you know, these personalities. So we have all these different ways to connect the ancient African, East African, ancient Kemetic, Nile Valley people here in the Americas at the same time.
Thank you. Just FYI, everyone, I did disable the Q&A so that way we can wrap up. Few comments. Dr. Yvonne Fields says great information, especially when it comes to naming, the importance of it, and that she cannot wait to buy a copy of your book. Brother B. Young said that unfortunately they won't be able to use your book in Florida. And Brother Young, that is a continued fight. Sandy Willis wanted to stamp when we were talking about the racial classification of people and how we internalize those things, how it is at best a psychological assault. We have two more questions. This is from Nicole Franklin. Hey, Nicole. Hello, Dr. Miles. Based on your experience as a secondary educator, what topic hooks or invest your students to think differently about the role and position of their people in American history?
Well, the topic that most of the babies really, really love, like, are the Moors. They gravitate to that so quick. So we're at the end of the semester, and because I have almost a 20-year, like, you know, development in teaching, being a college professor, I still treat my young, you know, scholars like, you know, you go and get prepared for this. So my young scholars have to write a major research essay. They have to do a PowerPoint presentation and an oral presentation at the end of the semester in order to demonstrate their understanding of many of the topics that we've been discussing throughout our world history class. And many of the scholars want to write about the Moors. One, I think they connect most with understanding that they do have a narrative where they see Black people as being like far more than just, you know, the progeny of somebody else's making, right? Here they learned that it was Moors who went up into Europe and brought Europe out of their dark ages. They understand it was Moors who brought all these different sciences into Europe. They understand that if not for Moorish literature, like we wouldn't be having the same conversation about different populations of people having the ability to oppress people who identify as who become identified as Negro, Black, and color. So the babies really migrate to that. And of course, when I do the America Before Columbus segment, and we get to study the major empires of early America from the Maya, the Olmec Maya, let me do it right, the Azteca, the early confederations of North America, from the Iroquois to the Washita to the Yamasee, because I'm Yamasee, so I want to make sure I teach my people that. And you know, of course, the Inca. So they really enjoy learning about and you know, grasping like who was here before the 1492 narrative, and you know, what were we like before. And yeah, so they gravitate toward that.
Okay. And a brother, Curtis Todd, one of your former colleagues at Atlanta Metropolitan State College, wishes you respect and success with this much needed text. At this time, I'm sure you all notice, it's always an honor to have this sister in our presence, Dr. Valerie Grimm, our president of the National Council for Black Studies. And Dr. Grimm is actually going to close us out. Before Dr. Grimm closes us out, I do want to say, please join us Tuesday, May 23rd for a conversation with Dr. Daniel Black on his latest book, Black on Black on Black. Now, I just love saying Black on Black on Black, but it's Black on Black. But you know how we do, Black people, we make everything extra. So please make sure you register for that webinar. Also, Dr. Miles should have dropped his book link in the chat. So please make sure you purchase. I guarantee that you will love this text. And it's a text that I'm even considering for when I teach race in my own classrooms at the collegiate level. So please take a look at it and see where it could fit into your curriculum as well. All right, at this time, I would love to turn it over to Dr. Grimm.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Fournette, and thank you, Dr. Miles. Good to meet you via Zoom. I so much enjoyed the conversation and the dissemination of knowledge that you provided in this space. I kind of been thinking as you were discussing this long plan of forge insubordination, or attempt to forge insubordination from African descended people, and it just made me think a lot about how we have to understand the resilience of African descended people, especially those who were pulled from their homelands and who were taken into many different worlds against their wishes, and forced to become slaves of other people and forced to live segregated lives after slavery, and who were Jim Crowed, and you know the narrative. But it reminds me, though, if we are listening very carefully to what you were saying to us, is that there is an epistemological understanding of who we are, if only we would take the time to understand who we are and where we've come from. And so what you've done here tonight, I believe, is provided us with something even greater than what money could buy, or even better than money. And that is an understanding that we have, that we as a people, we have been hung high and stretched wide, and we still are here doing the work. And the hardest work that we have done, and I would say that we probably would have to remain consistent in doing, is not allowing the way in which white supremacy as a constructed idea from Europe to American all over the world today, is not allowing it to be the destructive tool that it is, and in breaking our spirit, because that has been the thing that caused us to be most resilient in the places from which we have come, that we have through, you know, through hardships and other kinds of things, not allowed our spirit to be destroyed. Although we've been beaten and disappointed and things of that sort, that the tactics used by the oppressors have not caused us to believe that we should not be here and that we can't make it. And I think that when students learn what our contributions have been, and I loved your conversation about the Moors, because I'm really interested in the, you know, the Moors in the period of Queen Isabella. And so, because that was a rough ride, you hear me? But you know, we're still here. And so I just want, that's what I want people to at least take from that. Just listen to what you're saying and read what you have written and ask yourself, everything that have been thrown at us, we are still here. Every lie that's been told about who we are not and what we have not done, we have stood up all kinds of institution ideas and creativity and innovation to say we are a people who were created to have majesty, you know, to just be, we were created for greatness. That is the greatest thing that we miss in telling our kids. Nobody spend their time trying to oppress somebody who ain't going anywhere. They just leave you alone, right? And so I just think that this conversation about intersections is so important, because while intersections on the one hand, we can see have resulted in some obstruction, but there are intersections that we've created on our own. Our whole lives have not been about just responding to the madness of the oppressor, that our lives more than anything else has been an expression of our own creative genius in our own survival. And we have to tell that story from any location in the world. You will find our people because we have been here. And I just want to thank you for how you laid that conversation out and for helping us understand that the eugenic movement is not over. It just looks different. That the wolf is just wearing a different jacket, but he still is a wolf. And but we have to understand that. So thank you very much for enlightening us tonight. And I want to thank Dr. Fournette for, again, a wonderful conversation that you have set up. And I just think that we have to keep talking to each other. We just have to keep reminding ourselves that there is greatness in our children and greatness in us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming out tonight virtually again. We hope to see you next week, Tuesday, for our conversation with Dr. Daniel Black. Dr. Miles, my brother, thank you. It has been an honor, and I will speak to you shortly.
That's clear.
Everyone have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Leisha.
Thank you. You have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.